So yeah, I run a project called Playing Out, based in Bristol. Project's kind of it's more of a movement really that's become a national movement, and yeah, I'm really kind of pleased to be here today. When Ruth first invited me, I was a bit puzzled about what the link would be between what I do and youth work. But the more I've thought about it, the more I think there's actually a lot to think about and there's a lot to talk about. Playing Out is mostly the sort of obvious audience is younger children, but then of course younger children become older children and become teenagers and young adults, and I think it's about kind of starting at that young age, giving young children a sense of belonging in their community. That's essentially kind of what we're about. So hopefully you'll sort of start thinking about some of the relevance to what you do. Oh, it's a really bad photo off my phone of an event that we were involved in yesterday, launching the idea of Bristol being a child-friendly city. And I know Leeds actually is officially a child-friendly city, or is trying to become a child-friendly city. We're going about it in our own Bristol way, so this is very much led by some grassroots organisations, ours and some others that are working directly with communities, particularly in more sort of disconnected areas of deprivation. This is a group of young people from a particular project in Hartcliffe in Bristol, which is one of the most deprived bits of the city. And they made these placards kind of after talking and thinking about what they would want from their city to be more child friendly. They came up with some slogans, and a lot of them were about wanting to feel safe and to feel a sense of belonging in where they live, in the physical environment, in their streets and in public spaces. And a lot of them just saying they just didn't feel like they could even go outside and play. So that was kind of sad, but also really affirming about what what we're trying to do. So just to go back to the sort of beginning of the story of how Playing Out came about. So this isn't me, but it could be me in the 70s. This is actually my friend Ingrid, who grew up in Nottingham. I grew up in Bristol. And Playing Out was just sort of a normal part of our lives. It's just what we did, and I'm sure that's probably the same for most of us here. You know, if you think back to what you did outside of school time, quite a lot of it was probably just playing out around the streets and where you lived, and not so much sort of structured activities. Whereas now, sort of with the very best of intentions, it feels very much like we, as adult society, have now decided that the street is not a suitable place for children, young people to be hanging out. We've created sort of designated spaces that they can do that. And the message is a bit like, we've made these spaces for you, we've put on these activities for you, we've put on these clubs, so that's where you need to be, and a bit of a sense that it's not really okay to just be hanging around or mucking about in the street anymore. Which might have its advantages, but alongside that, children's ability to get to those spaces on their own, under their own steam, has massively dropped. And this picture is actually from the Daily Mail a few years ago, and it was a story about how over 4 generations children's ability to roam around their own neighbourhood has shrunk. So it's a kind of, I don't know if you can get the sense of it, but this is the space that the great-grandfather of this family had to roam. And it says that aged 8 he was allowed to walk 6 miles on his own to go fishing. And then over the generations that circle has shrunk to the grandfather's circle, the mother's, and then the son was only allowed to walk to the end of his own street and back. And aged 8, and I know a lot of 8-year-olds that aren't even allowed to do that. They're not even allowed out their own front door on their own. So there is a real issue with the fact that we've contained children's kind of outdoor play to these spaces that they have to get to, but we've also at the same time lost the opportunity for them to get there on their own. So what it means is children have just become, these slides aren't really showing up there, but children have become very adult dependent, basically. So this is where I live, and the absolute norm where I live is that parents will walk their children to and from school right through primary school, right to the end of primary school. They might just start, you know, like maybe in the last term of primary school, let them have a bit of independence just to get them used to it before secondary school. But essentially children are very, very supervised and managed by adults. And kind of the end result of that is, and I'm not sure if this is the same in the areas where you work, but definitely my experience as a parent was that children spent a lot of time inside. And there's loads of stuff in the media about, you know, children not being outside enough and, you know, not being free range enough. And a lot of blame put on children themselves, I think, for, oh, well, they just want to be on their screens all the time, they're addicted, and or on parents being like mollycoddling and overprotective. But actually, I think that is a bit of a, it's a bit of a scapegoat, because we all need to look at, you know, as a society, about the environment that we've created.
I just wanted to make a point. There was an article that I read called Cotton Wool Kids. I don't know
Yeah,
if anyone read it.
that type of thing, yeah.
It's interesting because the media talk about how young people are more sort of enclosed and they're using social media more, which they are, but at the same time the media are kind of, there's this hysteria about children shouldn't go out because there's more paedophiles on the street, and there's all this kind of...
Yeah, there's a hypocrisy about it.
Yeah, so parents are more frightened, you know, when you do research and look at sort of, I've done surveys in the past with parents and I said, why don't you let your kids go out, especially like in family as well, and it's because they say it's not safe.
Yeah.
But has that changed? You know, that's the question. When we were younger and we played on the streets, has it become less safe to play on the streets, or is it just that we know more about things that can happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, the next thing I was going to say is, why is that? Why are we keeping children inside and supervised so much? And I think that fear about sort of general sort of stranger danger and all that kind of stuff is part of it. But actually, studies that have looked into this have shown that the number one fear that parents have is actually traffic. And that is a real change from when I was growing up. There is a lot more traffic on the streets, and streets feel a lot more car dominated. So I think there's a whole mixture of reasons why children aren't getting outside as much, but traffic seems to be a big concern for parents. So, kind of coming back to my story, I was talking to a lot of other parents about this issue, and we were all just feeling the same. Like, we just wanted our children to be able to go outside the front door and play. And we all, for us, like, traffic was the main kind of concern. This is my street, and just looking at it, you know, there's loads of parked cars, and then there's just this empty space, which potentially, you know, our kids could be playing football in, they could be using that space, but we just don't feel safe to let them use it because there are cars zooming up and down all the time. So me and my neighbour Amy started sort of thinking, well, how could we change that around? So we'd had a couple of street parties. That was one of our early street parties, and we'd got the local supermarket had sponsored a bouncy castle, and that was all great. But it's quite a lot of palaver to organise, and it's like a once a year thing, big event. So we started thinking, but hang on a minute, we can apply to the council to close the road to cars to do a street party. Why can't we just close the road to cars so that kids can play there? So we did that. We talked to our neighbours and got permission. We got permission from the council to close the road just for 2 hours after school one day. 3 hours, 3 till 6. And we wanted to just see what would happen if we just took the cars away and didn't do anything else, didn't organise anything else. And the other thing that we did as part of this was we got neighbours to volunteer to steward each end of the street to make sure it was like a safe space. And we didn't make people all move their parked cars off the street. The steward's job was partly to walk in front of any cars that wanted to come in to park or leave. So we were trying to create a a sense of normality about it. That it wasn't like a street party where everything had to change and everyone had to move their cars. And then what happened was kids came out and then they just played in a really natural, normal way, like as if they did it every day, which they didn't. But and this girl, she's my friend's daughter, just went up and down the road on her bike for like 2 hours non-stop. So as a result of doing that, we realised we were kind of onto something maybe. So we got a bit of funding from Public Health at the council to support some other streets around Bristol. That was one of the early streets. And through that we kind of learned a lot about the ins and outs of it and what support people needed to do it. But we were still very much trying to keep it as a resident-led thing. You know, we weren't going in and doing everything for people. We were just giving them our experience and a bit of hand-holding and a bit of moral support and things. And then the next thing we did was set up a website, and we sort of put all the learning about what we'd done on the internet and then just let it go. And we didn't know like what would happen or if anyone would be interested, but started to get some interest from people, not just in Bristol but like other parts of the country, saying, oh, how can we do this? Then the next thing that happened was the council kind of, and particularly Public Health, kind of saw the potential for this and got behind it, and they changed their policy so that instead of just being able to close your street, I think they had up to 3 times a year, they brought in a new temporary play street policy where you could apply to close your street up to once a week for a whole year. So you just had to consult with the neighbours, and as long as there were no objections, you could go ahead and do that. And we got quite a lot of national media coverage at that point. This was quite a few years ago. And then as a result of that, the idea just took off. It's a terrible map, but kind of showing where things were a few years ago. We just got bombarded by inquiries from people all over the country just saying, how do I do this on my street? And it was just brilliant to sort of know that we weren't on our own, that there are other parents out there that felt the same. Not just parents, actually. There were, you know, people, older people and people that didn't have kids that were going, I really want to see this happening on my street. So, and then since then, just to quickly wrap up, we've got some other funding to specifically work in estates around Bristol, because the model originally was very street-based, and we sort of knew that it worked in certain types of streets, certain types of communities where there was already, you know, enough kind of confidence and sense of community for people to get that off the ground. But we wanted to see whether there was any possibility for something similar to happen in places that were maybe didn't have all that going, and maybe wasn't on the street. Maybe they've got another space which is right outside the front door that is underused. So this was a recent first session that some residents organised in some council flats in Bristol. So in terms of the outcomes of it so far, this has been going for about 5 years now, and we've had some university evaluation done, mainly looking at the physical activity side of it, because that's where the kind of the funding is to get children more physically active. But what's kind of almost more interesting, and particularly in the context of this conference, is the impact on communities and people kind of saying, I've just got, you know, I've got so much more sense of being part of a community, being on my street, knowing my neighbours, my kids are playing with other kids on the street. What you see during sessions, and hopefully I can show you a film, is like all ages of kids playing together in a way that doesn't seem to happen, well, it definitely doesn't happen in school, and it doesn't really seem to happen in the parks and that kind of more formal settings. But in the street, there's just a sense of the older kids looking out for the younger kids and bossing them around and, you know, managing their games a bit. So that's been a really nice outcome. And the other thing that I think is important to think about is, because it's adults on their own street making this happen, the children on that street are seeing adults being active citizens. and they are, you know, receiving the benefit of that directly. So, you know, the hope is that those kids will grow up with a bit of a sense of, you know, I can change things in my own community. It's my responsibility, you know, it's a shared responsibility to make communities somewhere everyone feels safe and all that kind of stuff. And just to grow up with a bit more sense of citizenship than they might otherwise have. That's just a nice photo of a old guy drinking a cup of tea. But that does happen as well, that older people will just come out and have a cup of tea and reminisce for hours about what they used to do as a lad. So yeah, just to finish up, that's going back to my street. You know, this is what I'd like to see, that just for that to be normal every day, not to have to close the road, just for kids to sort of feel safe and feel legitimate to be in that space every day. But there's a lot that needs to happen, and we see this playing out model is just closing the road once a week, once a month to sort of bring everyone together and make that happen. It's just a catalyst, really. It's not at all the long-term solution. There's a much wider kind of social change that needs to happen to make that possible. And we've all got to drive our cars less, and, you know, when we're driving through residential areas, just to be conscious that people live there and children might be playing out, and just to be more considerate, really, about sharing that space, that really important space. I have got a little, very short film to show. I'm not sure about the sound, how the sound's going to work, if you've got anything to plug in, or if I just put it right up. Yeah, so this is just, I'm afraid it's my voice again on the voiceover, which is annoying, but try and ignore that and just look at the picture. Should we try this?
Yeah, give it a go.
Okay. Oh, what happened there?
We wanted our children to have the freedom to play out like we did, to just make friends on the street, to feel part of their community. We decided to try closing the road to cars.
This would be a good opportunity to get children out a little bit more, but also for me to meet some of the older neighbours. You don't want to sit in front of the television, do you? It's great to be out. I've just walked down this road and met loads of people I've never seen before.
I think it's great. I kind of grew up in these streets. We used to play in this road. Thought we had freedom. We were out to play till about 8 o'clock.
Other residents who've come out, older residents in particular, have been really surprised at the number of children who live in and around this street, because we just don't see them normally.
Just made the road a nice place to live, really. Thousands of people have now been involved in playing out on their own streets all over the UK. We hope this is a small step towards all children having the freedom to play out where they live every day.
So I'm also doing a workshop session straight after lunch, if anyone wants to come to that and just learn more about the nuts and bolts, really, of how to support residents to do this, and also hopefully have time for a bit of a wider discussion about the importance of the street as a space for children and young people, and how youth work might kind of link in to that. So, yeah, hopefully some of you will come.